I think the next session is going to be really, really interesting. As we've heard from a lot of speakers, it's very easy at times to give the politicians a flogging. And don't get me wrong, because sometimes they deserve it. But I think, to be fair, that many of our local politicians have played a really important role, and I know because I've been a political advisor in a previous life, they do knock their heads against cement sometimes and against brick walls. You know, the latest one we saw was South Australia, an election coming up, and suddenly you again were playthings for key seats in Adelaide. And I think when we ask these guys to come up, I think it's really important to remember that politics, as John Howard said, is a brutal game of numbers. And if you don't have the numbers, you lose. And I think what we need to do as a community is to remember that and to probably ask our politicians, particularly our local ones, rather than flogging them all the time, is what can we do to help you convince your colleagues in the city that we have a problem that needs to be resolved. And I guess to that end, we know when we invited, and we're really pleased that they could come along today, when we invited them, we sort of suggested, is there a way, what can we do to help you? And I guess that's probably a key theme with our politicians. I'm going to go in this order first. So I'm sorry, Austin, you're going to go first just to swing along. We're not going to go in any particular order. We'll keep it pretty short with them. But again, I just ask you to keep that in mind for questions is, you know, we do have irrigators. We do have people like Austin who have run Colamble Irrigation, was the engineer there. They do know water. They know which way it flows. But again, I take it, we've got to remind them at times that communities are hurting and that this is an issue that we all care about, not just irrigators, but we've got a broad range of people here today. And I really thank you guys for sitting here for the whole day and taking the whole day out, because often pollies have a reputation for fly in, fly out, they're FIFOs. But today you've sat through it and we really appreciate that. Austin Evans, member for
Thanks Tom, thanks Colin, thanks Shelley, thanks Vicky, everyone that's organised today. Fantastic effort for everyone getting here. As Tom said, I've only come to this role recently, last October at a by-election. Previous to that, I was 13 years as the head engineer at Collie Irrigation. And I guess one of the things I want to bring to today and try and move us forward of where we can go with this is a lesson that I've learned in those years of being engineering, is we need to find deliverable solutions. And touching on what Tom said, there's no one here in this room that disagrees with what's been said today and where we've got to go and where we would want to go with this. The challenge is we've got to convince the people who aren't in this room. So the example we've had just recently with the disallowance motion on the Northern Basin adjustment probably doesn't directly affect this room very much, and I know you know, it was more to do with the Northern Basin, but it is a disturbing development that we've got people. It was a 4-year process, 40 plus studies were done on what should be done, how that should be measured, based on the fact the original number was based on a really back of the envelope estimate. And at the end of that 4 years and all those studies and all that work that everyone put in, we got knocked off by one vote in the Federal Senate because there was a South Australian election coming. So, you know, if we'd have had one person, and probably Darren Hinch cops a lot of flack because he was probably the last person to agree, but if we'd have had that one person, it had gone the other way. So that's what we have to do as a community. It's not get around here locally and convince each other because we all furiously agree with each other. What we have to do is get out there and push those other people elsewhere. Now, I've heard what I've got on the grapevine is that motion, which can be presented again, would probably sail through next time because we're not facing a South Australian election. The big challenge for us is going to be the one in May, 7th, 8th of May, something like that. It's due to come up before Federal Parliament, is the disallowance of the 605 SDL adjustments. That's the big one, so we've got to get out there and convince the likes of Darren Hinch, and I know our colleagues in Victoria have been working hard on that already, so that we don't have to rely on the games if the Labor Party's going to play games with this like they did with the 70 gig Northern adjustment. So that's the challenge for us to do that. I guess as the New South Wales government representative in the room, The other thing that's going on, and some people have talked to me about it today, is the NRAR consultation that's going on. Some people went up to Griffith last Friday. I'd encourage you, submissions are due on that on Monday. These are important reforms. They're around metering and monitoring. They're around, there's four discussion papers, metering and monitoring, transparency of information, and that's probably the one that will affect most in this area because it's about whether they put information about extractions and trading and stuff like that and how far they go. So, you know, as a business operator, as most of you are, you probably don't want that information brought right down to a farm level, so you need to say that in the submissions. The management of environmental water, as a couple of people have already talked about here today, that's a big issue, and it's coupled with the transparency. We've got to get that more transparent. And then the last one's floodplain harvesting, which again probably doesn't affect this area as much, but it does have impacts, and someone mentioned the Lower Darling before. I've been reading submissions to do with the basin plan and other things since 2004 when I started at Collie Irrigation. And I can assure you, for those of you who read it, probably should agree with me that these are some of the best written discussion papers I've seen. They're only small, they're concise, they get to the point, they talk about the things we need to think. So if you haven't had a chance, please go out and read them. They're only 20, 30 pages, something like that each. You can get through them and get your submissions in because we need to get these changes through. Otherwise, I'll be here for questions later. Thank you.